So this is, look, a really important one. The fourth industrial revolution is a concept which is, partially at least owned by the fourth industrial revolution, by the World Economic Forum. We started talking about this in some detail around 2015 when our founder and executive chairman, Professor Klaus Schwab, wrote a book. Since then, it informs a lot of our thinking. We believe the technologies that are emerging now, such as AI and big data analytics and robotics, and all of those technologies are merging together and changing not only the future of our world, but also changing existing industries. But it's an important conversation, especially in the context of is it a good policy instrument to advance on these technologies when other priorities, so many priorities across economic and societal policy areas exist. So I'm going to rush through the panel because we have a very short time for this one. Alison Gilward is from Research ICT Africa. Then we have Ian Oluwu Abayeji. You were from Flutterwave until recently, but now you work for Future Africa, which is a privately backed development fund. You're funding the entrepreneurs of the future. Angetuku Shangwei, you're from Afro's Transformational Games, a digital learning organization. David Sangwei, you're the Chief Innovation Officer for Sierra Leone and advisor to the President. So a glittering cast. Alison, you wrote a skeptical piece recently, so I think we should really start with you. There is nothing inherent in so-called 4IR technologies that will necessarily result in economic growth, job creation, or empowerment of the marginalized. Very important, bearing in mind the theme of this meeting, which is inclusive growth and shared futures, and using technology as a tool for societal as well as economic good. So explain a little bit about your thinking around that.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. So I work with an African think tank called Research ICT Africa, and at the University of Cape Town at the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance on a digital economy and society doctoral program. So my perspective is really a policy perspective on this, and it's very much an African perspective on this. And we've been working in the area of ICT, policy and regulation, telecom originally, and ICT, and now, of course, the challenges of the so-called fourth industrial revolution. Because a part of this critique from an academic point of view is that it really glosses over and appropriates a really significant body of literature that comes from the conjunctive waves that were, the first reference to the industrial revolution with advanced capitalism and new technologies, and of course made popularized by Schumpeter around innovation and as a kind of core theory of innovation. But it's a very specific policy lessons to be learned from these that could be extrapolated to new technologies as they're arising. And some of these are, of course, around the disruption of these new technologies, and also around the interests that coalesce around these technologies. And these technologies have always coalesced around big capital of the day, industrial capital of the second and third industrial revolution, and then of course with the so-called third industrial revolution, although that's not quite the sequencing in the conjunctive waves, the big capital associated with digital and telecom and that kind of thing that was happening. So from this literature, what we actually see is that of course there are disruptions, but there is also incredible evolution. And there are enormous continuities. And one of the continuities is actually inequalities that are continuous throughout this. So the benefits that accrue from these, although in the longer term, the benefits of electrification or ICTs do accrue to the masses indirectly, even if they don't have direct access to them, it actually is at the moment exacerbating inequality. And I think this is one of the central policy challenges globally, but particularly for developing countries, this digital inequality paradox, that in fact, the more we overlay advanced technologies on existing structural inequalities, the greater the gap gets. And that's not only between those offline and online, but between those who are able to use these technologies for their own well-being, for prosperity, for advancement of certain things.
Yeah. So your critique, and I'm just mindful of time, so that's very good. So your critique is that this disruption is an ongoing evolution rather than a new industrial epoch, and that it's the continuation of inequality that is one of the greatest challenges and problems associated with this labeling of the fourth industrial revolution.
Well, it's that, but also that the way that the fourth industrial revolution has been marketed, I mean, probably one of, as I said, the most successfully lobbied and marketed instruments of our time, is that it's completely preoccupied governments, developing country governments as well, and distracted them from addressing these existing inequalities that are in fact creating the preconditions that are necessary for us to harness the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution.
That's a very well understood point. So your worry here is that talk of the fourth industrial revolution is a gloss that is distracting people from the real substantive issues that underlie inequality. So we've got a really interesting mix here. We've got a venture financer, we've got a entrepreneur who's got her own business, and we've got a guy who invests government. So I'm going to call you I because you told me that was okay.
Yeah, everyone calls me E.
So call me E. I'm going to call you E. Let us know from your perspective. You've just moved from being a startup, an entrepreneur yourself. Now you're investing in others, and this is a real problem. We have millions entering the job market every year in sub-Saharan Africa, and we know that factory floor jobs are not going to be increasing in the way they have in other regions as they industrialize in Asia and elsewhere. So we need to find work, good quality work, to reduce the inequality we know exists. Do you have confidence in the fourth industrial revolution to do that?
So, I mean, my perspective, in some ways, is similar to hers, in the sense that absolutely the fourth industrial revolution as a practical focus for governments may not necessarily be the wise approach to take. However, I think one thing it's helpful to understand about the fourth industrial revolution as I see it, and the relationship between that and inequality, is that this, for the first time, and that's the magic of the fourth industrial revolution, is the only time when the critical factor of production is simply labor. For the first time, you have labor as the critical factor of production. When you talk about the fourth industrial revolution, the most important element, which I think most people in this conversation miss, is talent. Talent that is able to absorb these concepts and leverage them to create change in the society. I don't consider myself just capital. I consider myself activist capital. So when we apply capital to companies, we apply capital not just because we want returns. That's a byproduct of applying the capital. We apply the capital to level society and to leverage the startup's innovation capacity to be able to scale very quickly innovations that give everybody access to a life that is both going to guarantee them purpose and prosperity. Understanding that critical point about the fourth industrial revolution is the starting point for this conversation about talent. And the work that I've done with Andela, when we started Andela in 2014, we were walking into an ecosystem where software engineers were not valued and they did not exist. However, these were globally valuable skills. The local elites, obviously boosted by this general idea that the fourth industrial revolution is not important, or it's a marketing gimmick for taking more money out of the system and pretending to do any kind of work, did not take us seriously. However, within a 4-year period, we had built several $100 million of value, educated over 100,000 young people in basic software engineering skills, and opened them up to the global economy. This is something that was not possible to do in other industrial revolutions. It was not possible for you to sit in your bedroom in Lagos and work for multinationals all over the world. And this is the first time. But I think what's important is also understanding, well, you could call it the third industrial revolution, but think about all the ways that in the fourth industrial revolution, that capacity translates from simply being simply the ability for you to just service multinationals, but the ability to create your products from anywhere. You have biogenetics, the ability to do this from anywhere. What funding company is doing biogenetics in Nigeria? So I think it's a little bit, paternalistic to say, oh, Africa, you don't deserve, it just exacerbates the inequality, in my opinion. Why not invest in the talent in Africa? There's AI talent that's world-class in Africa. There's biogenetics talent that's world-class in Africa. There's 3D printing talent that's world-class in Africa. There is engineering talent that's world-class in Africa. Why not AWS, which is cloud, one of the elements of the fourth industrial revolution, was invented here in Cape Town. So the question is, why are we not elevating the talent on these platforms to global standards and creating a global market for our talent as we move into this new era? Why are we talking to just investing in governments who don't know what the hell these things are, investing time in educating them instead of educating people?
I'm loving the look here from our government.
Yeah, instead of investing in the talent that has to deliver on this promise of the fourth industrial revolution. I appreciate the work Senge does, but what I'm saying is the focus is often misplaced. The leaders of the fourth industrial revolution are not government or academia. They are young African talent, hungry for opportunities to participate in a global economy. And the fourth industrial revolution is their best chance.
So we're going to leave it there for now. It's a very good point, well made. So basically, yeah, you made an eloquent case of the fourth is different from the third because it's empowering to individuals. Doesn't quite get to the point of inequality, but it does give people with talent the opportunity to get themselves a leg up. So Anne, maybe you could kind of take it from there. Yeah. I know you work a lot with women as well, and so that's a very important angle. Again, it's the inequality and it's the 4IR, and it's how to kind of harness the technology so that we don't leave either of those at a disadvantage.
Let me just say that, like I'm a Kenyan, so I have a day job and I have a night job. So my day job really right now is that I run United Nations Women. And that's why I have this very strong gender equality lens, but also as a social entrepreneur, my social entrepreneurship was focusing very much on the issues of gender inequality in the first instance. So, I think the big thing for us is that the fourth industrial revolution, if it goes ahead in its current form, the data is that it will take us 217 years in the current pace at which we interact in society for gender equality. But in the fourth industrial revolution, it will take us 700 years. So the exclusion of women, it's a conversation that E is having, and it's it's young people, it's people who are in the city centers, but many young, women across the African continent are not even participating by any means in this conversation. So we have all kinds of data that is basically showing us that, where you've got increasing engagement, apart from Kenya, where I come from, where more and more women have had access to an M-Pesa, but in most other economies, that's just not happening. And so the exclusion of women is an issue that we have to pay very close attention to. Otherwise, there's no revolution whatsoever. And it's a revolution that is assuming that we have a world that is completely apart from the world that is pushing forward with the fourth industrial revolution.
And we had an issue briefing this morning. Sorry, forgive me for interrupting, but we had an issue briefing on gender-based violence this morning. It was a smaller session as part of our original program. We upgraded it, needed to get that in front of the live cameras, as we are now, by the way. And one of the takeaways from there was that they believed that technology had a positive role to play in helping empower women. It sounds like you're not quite so confident that is what's been happening so far.
I mean, there are different, of course. I mean, my mother, my grandmother, I'm from Kenya. My mother and my grandmother have leveraged technology. They have mobile phones. My grandmother pays her farm workers using her mobile phone through M-Pesa. So we've got some good stories. But we also have a lot of stories that are basically showing that the gap. So in other words, exactly what Alison was saying. We cannot assume that if we have a policy that is saying, we are going to have access to technology, that everybody has equal access to that technology. They don't. The inequalities that exist in society are pervasive, and they play out in the same way with technology. So my point is that the effort that needs to take place, if we're going to bring women on board, there has to be specific investment to ensure that equity happens. And one big example, and we've been studying where are there resources within governments for governments to actually move the industrial revolution or the internet even just to women. And what we found is that every government has universal service agency funds, right, that come from your telecoms companies. We did a study that found that there's about $400 million that is unspent in Africa. And that is money that could be used to just bring those who are excluded into the industry, into this whole technology world. But it's not being used, and it's not being used, and we've been calling as UN Women to say at least 50% of this has to go into specifically bringing women into the fourth industrial revolution.
How would you spend that money, very briefly?
So, different things. Educating girls, think of Hidden Figures, making sure that we're educating as many girls as possible, bringing them into the coding world, bringing women farmers so that they're able to access the technology, women who are women traders. They're still using old archaic systems that could enable them to move much faster, much cheaper, be able to actually market their products in much easier ways. So the question is just how do we connect them? And what's interesting for us is if you do a study of what happens when men are introduced to technology, they immediately leapfrog to the kind of future technologies we're thinking about. If you start thinking about how do we train women, we're back to the old sort of basics, word perfect, and what did we call it before? Yeah, basic training. So it's really, really, really basic for women. And then on this issue of gender-based violence, I think one of the things that we've seen is that we have to pay attention to what misinformation is doing. There are technologies that have been put on the table that are very useful for safety and security. And those are useful to be able to provide warnings and so on. But what we're finding is that a combination of misinformation, fake news, and hate speech is actually flooding the environment as well. So part of it is not from, I'm not saying let's not push forward with the benefits of it, but as we do so, recognize what the inequalities are and recognize what is happening. Cybercrime is a massive problem for young girls. And so this issue of GBV and in South Africa is something that is luring a lot of young girls into this environment.
And it's one of the action points we want to take away from this meeting is to get the tech industry around the table and figure out how we can help. Because we had some very simple interventions they could make to help, but there's also some issues that they need to help us resolve if we're going to improve society. But let's move on. David, how easy is it for you to find time in your president's busy schedule to talk about the fourth industrial revolution? How confident are you that he buys into any notion that the 4IR will solve societal as well as economic problems?
See, I wasn't told that I was going to come to a panel and be traumatized by what I hear. But I feel like what both of you said is as far away from what we need to be thinking about as could possibly be. You said that it's a distraction for government to be thinking about 4IR, that government might not be focused on this. This shouldn't be government's priority. There's nothing more appropriate and better to close inequality than 4IR. Like, it's like saying when there was 2IR and 3IR, African government should have been focused on slavery and decolonization, which is what they told us to do. And then we let other people invent computers and use computers. Because African governments were supposed to focus on democracy. And we're supposed to focus on how we deal with post-colonization. They didn't tell us to invest in computation because we weren't supposed to do that. The idea that we could possibly still in today be talking about whether it's appropriate for African governments to be doing 4IR is almost repulsive, because I'm an African government person and I sit in government and I use 3D printing with the president of Sierra Leone to look at where girls are not in school, and we use that data printed in front of us to look at the spikes and figure out how we do distribution of school buses. Because I sit in the president's office and we talk about AI and blockchain and how we can use eKYC for women who don't have banks, because the banks are only using cards, and these women are not going to get it to be able to access financing. I'm driving, having a drone corridor because we need to use satellite imagery and ground truth data that is not present in Africa. And so we're building models on data that the European Space Agency has and NASA to go and predict forest cover and loss in Africa. So it is repulsive to be a government person and get told that we should not be thinking about 4IR because it's not our priority. There's nothing that is more important for us as African governments and African leaders to begin to understand how we use the technologies of blockchain, of drones, of 3D printing, because, you know, the US is not leading us far away, and China is not leading us far away. So if we're not thinking about that now, and we have to think about it in 50 years, where will we be? And so when it comes to who should be doing it, I think the risk remain, the challenges remain, the inequality is going to be there. That is why we need to have girls coding. That is why we need to have young people coding. That is why the people in government should be young people. So yes, the president of Sierra Leone, I can text him from wherever I am, and the conversation that I texted him today was how we're going to use data and 4IR to lead our people. And he engages on that. And yes, the president of Sierra Leone today will ask me to go and do a 4-hour presentation to the rest of his cabinet because he understands that it is important, that that's the only way we're going to solve Sierra Leone's problems. How do we address maternal mortality that's the highest in Sierra Leone? We don't go and say, let's just sit down and have a conversation about family planning because that's what happens. And you know that if people are having fewer babies, that's fine. But we can and should use the digital data that we have for all of our health facilities and figure out what AI models tell us how women should have access, what USSD solutions we build to tell women when they don't know when to go to health facilities to go there, to be able to use USSD to find their nearest hospitals. Absolutely. That's what we should be doing.
It's a fine representation of a forward-looking government. I applaud you. How many other governments across Africa do you believe have this level of sophistication?
It should be all of them.
It should be.
So they should go to E, and they're young people. And so if the president of Sierra Leone did not say 6 months ago, I need to have a chief innovation officer, and said, how many other African governments are doing it, he wouldn't have done it. But because he did it, and because I can sit here, because Bogolo exists, because the Minister of Finance in Mali exists, because the Minister of Paula exists from Rwanda, because we exist, that is why we have to amplify these success stories so that other African governments are doing it. So they are already. The only reason why they are not doing it is because we second guess them. It's because we come and sit there. That's
not
why.
True. No, I'm sorry. No, we have to.
Because we do need to respond, but first of all, let's just see, because we always, when it gets fun, we run out of time too quickly. Anybody want to throw anything in from the audience? Just any hand grenades you want to just chuck onto the stage? Verbal ones, of course. No, all right. All right, we're entertaining you enough. Okay, so who goes first?
Yeah.
Alison, you go first.
I just wanted to say, you know, I think it's repugnant as an African, as a citizen, that there are discussions around sort of advanced technologies. In South Africa, at CIR, we've got the biggest 3D printer in the world, but we actually have 50% of our citizens offline, and that is way higher than many of the other countries in Africa. What we're talking about here is absolutely critical. We have to address issues of fourth industrial revolution, the potential of artificial intelligence, of blockchain, of all of these things. Of course, we don't have the luxury of dealing with the other things first before we deal with this. But we cannot prioritize these issues while we were sitting throughout the continent with internet penetration levels of below 15 and 20%, below the critical mass that you need in order to get economic development. That we're sitting with a structural inequality that means that women are unprivileged because that is what drives internet take-up. They are prevented from getting education, they're prevented from getting employment. We've got governments that are putting social networking taxes on our poor people, gaining access to the internet because that's the cheapest way that they can gain access to the internet. Speaking about, you know, drones and things, absolutely, the drones can do agricultural delivery of, medicines in Rwanda. But at the same time, you have to address the fact that of the countries surveyed by Research ICT Africa in 2018, it had the lowest internet penetration rate, despite being, you know, so forward-looking in so many other ways.
So you're looking for a fundamental structural issue such as internet penetration. That's quite fine.
I'm not debunking artificial intelligence. I'm saying absolutely we have to look at that.
But get the basics first.
But we've got to be addressing these other things.
Get the fundamentals.
But can I say something? I think there is a challenge here, which is that we think we're all saying different things, but we're not. Exactly what's happening is, first of all, you need to understand that these challenges are wicked problems. They're not static. They're evolving. You have to leapfrog to solve them. You cannot not solve maternal mortality issues by leveraging big data. That said, and this is a problem that even David would agree with me on, what talent are you using to do these things? Are they Sierra Leoneans
Yes,
entirely?
absolutely Sierra Leoneans.
Now, have you had to train them?
Yes.
Exactly. Now,
yes.
at scale, at scale, because this is where the inequality issues come from. The Sierra Leoneans like you have gone to MIT, they've gone to Harvard, they've gone to Stanford. They are privileged, right? The average Sierra Leonean child, the average South African child cannot read. How are we going to use 4IR technologies to tackle that challenge? Because if you tell me, and look, it's not one or the other, perhaps it has to be both, but we have to be absolutely clear about what problem we are solving.
But you know,
So this is fascinating. Yeah, Anne, I want you to make a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in truth, we're the ones who have to figure out how to simplify the technology so it's accessible for everybody. And I go back to my M-Pesa story. If my grandmother can actually pay people and communicate with me here, sitting in Mount Kenya, it is possible to do. If farmers who are in rural areas are able to, let's not dumb our countrymates, just because people are disadvantaged in terms of access of education. I think the challenge for us, and this is a lot of the work that we've been trying to do, is to actually say, how do you simplify this and structure it in a way that can create the access? So instead of dumbing women when you train them in technology and assuming that the only thing they can do is sort of basic learn how to type kind of thing, but actually start saying to them, this is how big data works. And this, and just use USSD technology, that works as well. So it is possible to meet this inequality. I think my big point was, there just has to be a seriously deliberate effort to do it. There has to be a serious investment in doing it.
And execution and urgency are the two watchwords of this meeting so far. Every single session, it's all about action, it's about executing now, it's about implementation, rather than just talking.
Yeah.
We're an action-oriented organisation, so that works for us. Because we're running so far out of time, I think it's been a very valid discussion. We know that the fourth industrial revolution technologies, if not its concept as an entirely separate industrial epoch, are happening. We know inclusive growth is necessary. We know inequality is unacceptable. So I'm just going to finish off by asking each of you just to make one policy description, one intervention, which is the most important thing for Africa to adapt and thrive in the era of the fourth industrial revolution technologies. David, over to you. But keep it brief.
Right. So the UADF is an example that could actually be used to spread connectivity. So connectivity access that can happen. I think the one fundamental policy is we have to believe in our people. As illiterate as we are, Sierra Leone has high, horrible illiteracy levels, and the results just came out, about 90% of our students failed the national exam. As failing as they are, as poor as we are, as horrible as we are in the terms that we're the worst in maternal mortality, it is precisely because of that our people have to be brought on to code, to think computationally, to solve the problems that we have using technologies that all of us have access to. Everybody can have access to a mobile. Let's figure out functional ways to give them connectivity, even if it's policy ways. Let's figure out a way to reimagine our educational systems such that they're not getting failed in English language, if they can think computationally and problem solve. And let's just believe in ourselves. This is about us, and we can believe in ourselves, and we can lead. That belief is the fundamental thing we can do.
Belief in the potential for leadership. And
every girl child must learn how to code. Every single girl child must be embedded in the system. That's the one. The second one is the resources are there. They're just not being prioritized to deal with the inequality in access. So if I would say that of that 408 million, and I'm sure it's more this year, I would put 100% of it to really identify who are the most marginalized and how do we invest in their access and their internet access now. It's possible to do. We have the technology to do
girls, women, and the most marginalized, and reallocating resources to focus on them.
Yeah.
I love the other policy suggestions. Mine would be, we need to liberalize our universities and encourage private sector to go do the research with 4IR to solve our problems at scale, while at the same time, which is why we need to do it in universities, providing a global pipeline of 4IR talent. We only have people in Africa. We don't have natural resources that the world wants anymore, right? All we have is a huge population of young people who are eager for opportunities, and 4IR is their best opportunity for us to have the next CEO of the next Microsoft, the next Google, the next whatever, come from Africa and position us, just as India has positioned its talent, as a source of understanding for this new technology. We miss this, we miss it forever.
It's not a bad endowment. I'll just say one comment that David Wong from Alibaba said yesterday in this room. We were talking about the Africa Growth Platform, an initiative we launched this meeting to help improve and drive entrepreneurial startup businesses. And he said that when he was talking to Jack Ma about Africa, it's the most excited he's been since he set up Alibaba. He sees a huge marketplace, a huge consumer marketplace, a population of over 1 billion, bigger than China in a few years' time. So you're not the only people who have faith in Africa. People from outside the region do too. Alison, last word for yourself.
Thank you.
And we're keeping you behind. Apologies for your delay that we're making you
Yeah, I'm going to dash off. But I absolutely agree. I think that the major cause of our structural inequality is education and unequal education. And it's something we have to address. While I think it's absolutely critical that we get the skills that we need for the third and fourth blurred industrial revolution, and that coding for girls and coding for people who haven't had employment up to now is a fabulous thing. I think if Harambe's here, they do a fantastic job of linking 500,000 potential job earners with 50,000 companies. So wonderful opportunities to create skills where the market needs them. Often the economy hasn't identified them. But I think actually, just returning to your point about public education, what we need is actually public investment in our institutions so that we can actually develop appropriate African evidence for policy. Why we accept these blueprints on assumptions about competitive, mature markets, effectively regulated markets, institutions with capacity to regulate, also is because we don't actually have the evidence and data of our own. And increasingly, as we move into a data environment with a datafication of the economy, actually getting control of this data, owning this data, and governing this data is going to become increasingly important. And it's really our core asset in our environment. Knowledge and data is what is going to drive our ability to harness these advanced technologies.
knowledge, data, women, the most marginalized, all together, put it all together, believe in yourself, and it will be a successful future for Africa. Thank you so much for joining us at short notice. Thank you for joining us here in the room. Thank you for watching us live online.